Hey, everybody, welcome to the Livelihood Project. I am Mike Manoske, about to be joined by two of my friends, and I have to stress the word friends, and fellow adventurers, Cynthia Abbott and Harold Strong. Today, we want to focus on something we think plays into the message of hope we had last week. And this is about resiliency. It's something that we're directly seeing in our work, in our personal life, and we think it's really important that given the amount of change and, to be honest, strangeness and transition we're all going through, that a couple ideas, thoughts, approaches around resiliency and around how to deflect stress, not get rid of it, but deflect. I think are the topics we're going to be covering a bit today. So I want to do the intro. I'll turn this over to the brilliant Cynthia Abbott.
Oh boy, that's
No stress, no pressure.
no pressure, no pressure. No, I know that this is something that we've been chatting about, kind of, in our space prior to going live, and it's one thing to talk about how everyone should just hang in and be hopeful and better days are coming, but how do you actually do that and do it broadly, right? Do it in your career, do it, personally. And I think that it's important to explore both because both intersect. And in the career space, even if you're not trying to have a career in the backdrop of COVID, there will still be times in your career that you need to be resilient. There was an article by Harvard Business Review recently where they're talking about how some people feel stress and they feel it as a form of anxiety, and other people feel stress as a motivator. And what I was interested in when I was reading that is, Harold, it makes me think of your journey and at some of your career points dealing with professional athletes. How did you find that they really channeled that pressure to perform versus where some take that stress and pressure and kind of collapse?
Good afternoon, and it's great to be here on the Livelihood Project with you two. It's always fun to talk to you, and I appreciate your question, Cynthia. Working with athletes is interesting because theirs is obviously physical and mental, but in situations where pressure is there, it moves way toward the physical thing. So they can just run it out, work it out, try to get comfortable and exhausted, and they visualize the stress, the pressure as an opponent. But they also focus a lot mentally so that they can focus on how do they make themselves prepared for this? How do they work through it? This isn't going to go away. It's going to happen again and again and again. It can be as simple, and Harold's saying simple, as making weight, or as challenging as recovering from some injury, or trying to compete to make the upcoming Olympic team, or a variety of different things. Once you get to the professional ranks, then it's also how do you make a living, not just how do you compete. So there are a lot of similarities there, and in our daily non-athletic lives, especially in the age of COVID, as we are trying to adapt to a new style of working and engaging and networking. We're doing it in our own little specific squares, in a partridge family kind of approach. In the meantime, I have my two dogs here. My wife is cooking. There are a couple of guys coming to cook. So how do we maintain professionalism, focus, and attention, and so that everyone is looking at me versus what kind of printer does that guy have, right? So there are pressures there as well. So I'd be interested to know, especially in the hire club world, Mike, as you have people who are looking to find better positions, level up, new positions, what kind of coaching, what feedback do you get in handling that type of activity?
It's a great question, and in the three buckets in my career and my work of the Wharton work I do, the hire club work I do, and then the private practice, it's interesting where you went because it's this mix of body mind, and I'm not saying that as an esoteric, confusing space. It's which goes first. In other words, if you're feeling a lot of pressure, do you go out and run? Do you hit the weights? My case, do you swim? Is that the way you break the cycle? And I think the key thing that I work on, and I know a lot of coaches work on, is interrupt. Classic example. I have a client who has social anxiety. It manifests itself right before meetings, particularly meetings she's going to run. She's in tech. And what she'll do is she'll send me a note, and the note says monkey brain. That's her term for I'm feeling stress. And I can say one word back, and it's interrupt. Now, that didn't happen overnight. That took months for us to, not a few months for us to really get that point. But you know, the thing is, the question really comes back to, which is the most effective in which situation? Is it, do I pause? Do I literally take a mental break? Do I meditate? Or do I go out, you know, in my case, do I hit my 1,000 yards in the pool? So it's almost like, what are your mechanisms for dealing with this? Mm-hmm. And which is the best tool to come off the shelf?
Mm-hmm. You know, in a physical office environment, it was often convenient to come up with rituals.
Yes.
Before I go to this meeting room, I'll go by the coffee shack, or I will make a stop. You know, I will do these things that will prepare me mentally through this rote process before I enter the room and hit the go button. Now I have to walk down the hall to make sure that everything is buttoned and then prepare to talk to people. But now I have to be a little bit more animated. I have to be a little bit more descriptive to engage people in the message that I'm trying to share. It can be mentally exhausting, but it has to be professionally effective. And so I really, just kind of kicking back a little bit, I really like the name of our group, Livelihood, because this really is that center point of what we're trying to target. How do you function, distractions, pressure, and still be effective?
I think it's such a great point. I mean, Cynthia, you've actually been living this. You know, all I've had to do is not wear button-down shirts. You know, for about 9 months. I mean, you've been in transition. You're back in leadership again. How's this? Tell us a bit of your journey around that.
You know, it's to say it hasn't been stressful, I think would be an understatement, right? Because being new anywhere is stressful. And then being new in the backdrop of remote COVID, trying to learn and also lead, right? I think we don't give leaders enough runway, if it were, right? And that they're still new. And you want to learn all that you can before you start making leadership recommendations. I've been working on just trying to have grace with myself and my team. And that, you know, there's not really anything new under the sun, right? We will get it figured out. You have other partners that can pull you in. One thing I've been working on is just being very honest and saying, you know, can we get 15 minutes? Because I don't think I fully understand. And I want to be a partner to you, and I want to understand. I think that far too often we're kind of groomed to not ask for help. We're supposed to be the ones that give help. But really assuming that everyone understands is kind of a misnomer. And I think one of the biggest things that, you know, can be a win is to not compare yourself to other people.
Oh gosh, yes.
They're not on your journey.
Yeah.
You know, don't look up at somebody else and say, well, you know, they're a this and I'm a that, and we're the same age, and it's not their journey, it's your journey, you know? And so I say that as someone who's had to work really hard to not cross compare.
That statement you made about, you know, it's your journey, not theirs, is probably 30% of my coaching. You know, people and their expectations about, well, you know, my friend Susan's now a VP and I'm an X, but that's her. And, you know, your journey is unique. Your journey can be incredibly rewarding. Let's put the bandwidth and the energy there.
You know, the other thing I heard was related to balance.
Yeah.
Trying to find that balance. And again, much like the competitive piece, balance is an individual equation as well. In being fair to your personal and home life, fair to your professional life, of course, fair to your cat. You gotta keep.
Gotta be fair to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if it's not that, you're out of balance, and then there's stress that enters into the mix because you've not handled this side of the equation, or you just ignored other pieces. And I think I speak from experience with that. But nonetheless, it's real critical to maintain some sense of balance and focus.
And I fell into that trap very early in my career, I think, and then I thought that balance would establish itself. Or, I would work so hard that I would be told, no, take time off, what have you. And that, as you scale and as you grow, you really have to be very firm in what that boundary is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you feel like you need to be up till 11 o'clock at night, doing email, that's your choice. I've pulled my boundary pretty firm, because I tell you where you see it leak in the most and you don't think about it. And that's the subconscious connection with your technology.
Yes. Well said. I think we can be perpetually on, and we're programmed to always be on. Yet the funny thing is, when I was in healthcare and I carried a pager, it was because I was the administrator for the night.
Right.
And when I got paged, it was a big deal. Later on when I went into tech, if I got paged, it was because the call center was down. I mean, why are we perpetually connected now? Is there something that I'm going to learn at 9 o'clock at night that is life-changing for my organization? Sometimes, but oftentimes no, or almost always no. And I think I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think we've made technology make us feel more important. Wow, if I'm getting emails at 11 o'clock, I must be important. Well, no, the other person may have some personal issues they're working through. Curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's been messaged to us as this is the cool new thing. Yeah. When really it's like, but weren't you a leader before you had your phone in your pocket? Right? Like we had all this leadership and all these companies before we had, Slack and Instant Messenger and GChat and texting, and we still had success. Mm-hmm. Warren Buffett does not carry a cell phone. He comes into the office, he works, and then he leaves. Now he gets that luxury. He has great lieutenants, what have you. But I do think you're right, Mike. It's this kind of self-aggrandizing. I'm important. So-and-so is texting me. And it's like, as we are in a remote world, and I've had to set this boundary myself, it's very easy to really extend yourself. Hour 10 becomes hour 15 real fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the burnout's still real. It's just in a box versus broader.
And the interesting thing about burnout is where burnout, you hit it, you could go, okay, I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to go into the mountains, or I'm going to go here. There are not a lot of places to go right now. Right. Physically. So you're kind of sitting with burnout more. And I think we're seeing some of that. I mean, I know from some clients I've seen that. And, I'm curious, Harold, I go back to the fact that you work with people throughout your career, both in business and then also your days at Nike with athletes. Dealing with getting to a burnout point has got to be a lot tougher now because a lot of those methods just aren't available.
It's true. When you're working in a physical office environment with people, customers, clients, partners, there is that opportunity to escape for a casual conversation,
right.
Water cooler talk, or let's grab lunch, or let's de-stress over lunch. Let's grab a cup of coffee. I think we have a misunderstanding of a particular project. Let's kind of talk that through in a very quiet, intimate moment, over coffee in the lobby. That way, okay, I understand what you meant. Sorry about that. Let's go. The challenge now is there are no virtual coffee shops that we can go to on Zoom or, anything like that. And
right.
A lot of people have moved away from the home headquarters area, and they're working from someplace where they feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. Could be at mom's, I don't know, but nonetheless, it's not in the same zip code anymore. So the opportunity to negotiate those misunderstandings is a little more difficult now.
Yeah.
I guess the way I address it is very selfishly, when possible, I try not to do Zoom calls. I try to do regular cell calls. And I walk while we talk in the
Yep.
neighborhood. So that gets me out of my little chair, gets me out from in front of the computer.
That's a great.
And I have distractions and I kind of relax and kind of go from there. It's helpful. Can't do that all the time.
Right.
You can always go to, to backyard, or, it's when weather is permitting, but that's a challenge. And again, throwing in my little equation of balance, it's difficult to maintain that balance when you don't have that opportunity to relax.
You brought up something, great suggestions, physically leave the closed-in environment, or at least parts of it. It's interesting. I've had about 6 clients move out of their home area, and many out of state. What's interesting is what I've now heard in the last 2 weeks from other clients, that their companies are putting a policy in that say you can only be away and work remotely for up to 3 weeks. 2 different companies I've heard now said this, and what part of the reason is, if you relocate, there are tax implications, and Cynthia knows as well. But the other thing is, there's a sense of, will you come back?
Yep. Well, and I think companies too are looking at, can we equalize this pay and have this cost savings?
Yes.
And if you're going to be there for several months, well, are you just going to be there, right? If I offered you a job in San Francisco and you now decided to move back to Knoxville, Tennessee to be with your family, can I realize some of those salary dollars in a savings, right? And so I think the early exodus, at least from San Francisco, was this concept of, I have a San Francisco salary, I'm going to go to Iowa and buy a house. And, even Facebook has come out and said that in 21, they're going to start right sizing their comp based on the area that you've relocated to.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you'll see some people come back, or people say, okay, I'm happy to take the decrease because I like my house and my pool and my yard and whatever.
Sure.
And, to tie all this back to what we've been initially talking about is, there's always that idea of the geographical escape. My stress will be lower if I live in Denver. By the way, that's almost a quote from a client of mine. And in his case, actually, it worked. I think it's been going pretty well for him. But you start to look at this and you go, okay, is that going to be a long-term answer? Or is there a ripple effect that's going to create more stress down the line? How far? It's not that we want, I think we all agree, we don't want people to be thinking, okay, what does this do for me in 5 years? But it is kind of this, okay, at a state of high transition, what do I need to be careful about so that I don't solve a short-term problem and create a longer-term, bigger problem?
Well, and if I ever want new opportunities, if I'm in the middle of, a small area of Alabama, am I going to have those opportunities that I had somewhere else? Probably not, because I think what you'll see companies do is they'll say, everyone who was here pre-COVID that's remote can stay remote, but new hiring post-COVID with vaccine, I think they'll say, we want people in office.
Yes, I think you're right. So, and I think we want people to be cognizant of that particularly, I think these next 6 to 9 months I'm optimistic about the vaccine getting into the general population, but I wouldn't be buying a home somewhere, in the Midwest if you're working on the West Coast. I think that might be dangerous. Not dangerous, but that might be short-sighted.
Right.
Yeah. Agreed. And if you look at the numbers, a lot of people actually did that. Like Redfin had one of the best years ever had, with people buying homes, and making mass exodus really from the West Coast.
Right.
And Nevada had a large uptick because it's the closest no income tax state to border us here. But I think that ties back into resiliency though, Mike, and that being resilient you know, a short-term solution now could create a longer-term problem. You know, you don't want to make those rash decisions in a vacuum just because you want to feel, you know, more space,
Right.
what have you. And when you're talking to your clients, like, how do you encourage them to be resilient and focus on the long term?
Well, I think I actually talk to people in 2-year cycles. And I think you guys have heard me talk about that before, that, you know, I get nervous when people tell me, well, my plan when I'm 55 and they're 25 makes me incredibly nervous, because I was a lot different at 25 than 55. I hate to admit I'm, you know, and I'm a lot distant now that I'm older than 55. It's so I really believe in a concept, and this is a well-known concept in learning called chunking. Take on smaller bites. And if you really start going, okay, so where do I want to be in 2 years? So where do I want to be at the beginning of 2023? Okay, now start to put a plan together, but also keep in mind that from January of 2021, where we are now, to July, August, maybe even September, is going to be weird. It's not going to be the norm. How do I set myself up to sort of move through this, knowing that, okay, I don't think I can do major league long-term planning beyond kind of my aspiration, but I can do some certain things now that'll keep the stress down, keep me focused, keep my eye on the ball for the future things. But this isn't the time for me to go buy the home in Boise, Idaho, maybe, unless I live in Boise, Idaho. You know, to make a significant geographical change might not be the best thing for you. It still could, but you've got to do a lot more weighing of things here, particularly the next 9 months.
And I think that may be a source of stress as well.
Yeah.
As people they've adapted to life physical, to now we are at home. And we're doing what we can with what we have. And now we're going to have to think about reemerging into the world,
Yes.
mixing with people. Vaccinations obviously are happening. And then the stress associated with, so my dog is used to me being here all day. How does that work? You know, where do I put them? Or, you know, I really got my office the way I like it. How about 2 days in the office and I'll spend the other days here? You know, there's going to be some balance of how that works. And I'm sure a lot of companies are appreciating the reduction of real estate cost to their bottom line. So I expect there will be shrinkage in office sharing and kind of a WeWork model, even in corporate environments.
Yep.
But that adjustment is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Harvard Business Review came out. There was an article that was done about, I'll say 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, called the 3-2-2 model.
Yeah.
And I think we may have even talked about that offline. The idea that you're only going to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week. Now, 3 days in, 2 days out, 2 days off, or the inverse, 2 days in, 3 days out, etc. So, you know, the idea of you commuting in every day is probably not going to be there for quite a while.
Right.
Even after we've come through this.
And I think that's the win. Like, I think that's the opportunity that a lot of people were waiting for. You know, I mean, we all live in cities where there's mass commute. You know, here we know people that are going from Fort Worth into Dallas and back and forth every day.
Correct.
And not having to do that, I think is a big win. For a lot of people. And to the point you made, families have gotten used to being together, and, you know, I'm here with my cat and my dog and my kids and what have you. Whereas all of that was really kind of pushed out to the side because you were at work and you had to commute back and forth or so on. I'm interested in a 3-2-2 or a 2-3 or what have you, just because I think too, there's wins, there's gains here that companies aren't thinking about. You know, there's this kind of almost unrealistic rush back to normal, because I think we all want to feel normal, right? Like, we all want to know we can at least go to an office because that feels normal to us.
Mm-hmm.
And right now is a very abnormal time. But what we're not thinking about is that there's a lot of win companies have by having people remote. There's less sick time utilized. There's less PTO time taken. There's less overall that employees are pulling from the company, you know, and less sick time because we're not around each other to get each other sick. And
Absolutely.
I think that is a win that we shouldn't overlook. And then if you think about, especially like San Francisco, a lot of employment constructs in San Francisco are based on, we're going to have all of this, not only time in the office, but all this communal time with all this food.
Yeah.
Well, are we really going to want to go back to all this communal eating, even with a vaccine? Because you're still going to have people who don't get vaccinated
Right.
by either lack of opportunity or lack of or choice, right? And okay,
Right.
that's fine. But are we going to, rush back to the salad bar and the sushi station and the steak? Are we? Because I don't think we are. I think we're going to see a lot of pause on that.
I think that's true. I think there's going to be a lot of bring your own lunch kit kind of thing. But I think the benefit will be getting back to the earlier conversation we had with how do we deal with stress and conflict that we may have with coworkers, where we can meet at the office safely and have a discussion, or we can meet to build that bond as a team. And meet the manager so that the manager has an understanding of personality, skill sets, and those types of things, so that there's just not throwing a message through an electronic fence. Instead, I know who you are. I've had a chance to sit, visit, understand personality without electronics getting in the way. And okay, I'm good. So 2 days a week in the office, if that is good, as long as there's some kind of connection. But again, from a resilient perspective, I think that blend is substantially better than, the islands of connectivity that we live on now.
I well said. I mean, and that's, that kind of comes back to our mission in the Livelihood Project, is to say, look, we're looking at that intersect point, that here's your career, here's your personal life, that Venn diagram. It's that intersect point in the middle. How do you have a good life? How do you create this sort of livelihood that energizes you for most of the time? And I think there's, Cynthia, your point earlier that this could be a win out of the pandemic. I agree with. I'm really hopeful. As an anecdote to that, early in the pandemic, I talked to a C-level executive at a major biotech firm, and he made two comments to me. Number one, he goes, "Yeah, it's been a few years since I did pandemic planning. So we don't know quite what we're doing." But his other comment was interesting. He's a multinational, and he said, "I'm really impressed with how much business we're doing and not getting on airplanes. I've got a European operation, I've got an Asian operation, I've got a United States operation, and frankly, we're still cranking."
Yeah.
So I wonder, the days of, and yours truly did that for many years, the days of the, 100, 200 day a year travel, where that goes. That may not bode well for hotels, but, for the people staying in there, that could be a good thing.
Yeah, I remember the days of competing to see who could fly 100,000 miles the fastest in a year.
Right.
And it was just almost thought of as a perk that you could do those kinds of things. But to your point, I think a lot of people are actually seeing in real life, you know what, I don't think we really need to do as much travel or as much meeting as we were doing. We define a plan and we execute that plan and go forward with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know that I miss work travel the way I thought I would.
Yeah.
It's a different level of stress prepping for work travel. And it's, I don't think, man, I really wish I could go X and, be away from home for a week and what have you. It's definitely a perk, I think, of having that continuity. So I think that as we, summarize and look at being resilient, it's kindness with yourself, it's kindness with others, it's staying grounded in the moment and being realistic, right? That no one really knows what's going to happen. And, as the old phrase goes, take it one day at a time. Any departing words for us, Harold?
Resiliency is critical for longevity and for productivity, and as well as being productive in your home, being there to listen and to enjoy and to have fun. I really enjoyed this conversation because it kind of expressed and exposed some things where we collectively have had thoughts, but it's good to kind of think it through. So no, this is a fun conversation. Mike?
I think my wrap ups are, have a good long-term dream, but make sure that your current planning is incredibly flexible, because I think that's really important right now. There's still a lot of unknowns. If you get yourself one way to decrease stress is all the positives we were talking about, but also don't lock yourself so into a model
Right.
that could be changed because of external stuff tomorrow.
Right.
It's true. It's
Cool.
very true. I love it. Thank you both so much for your time. We'll be back next week.
Yeah. Great to see you both.
All right,
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.